There's nothing in my lifetime that I cannot learn from or be empowered by in some way. Those are the words of my guest today. Peter Sage normally lives in Dubai. He's here in London. I caught him in transit, and he's here to share his passion with us today. We're in for a real treat. I've known Peter for about 7 years, maybe 8 now. We first met at a purification retreat in Wales. He drove up in his Ferrari, took the place by storm. His energy and enthusiasm was absolutely amazing, overwhelmed, and inspired us all. We sang together, we chanted together, we meditated together, we walked across a 6-inch rock ledge on a cliff face below a very powerful waterfall together. We shared some amazing times. We even shared the tubes that were used for our respective colonic irrigations. I am told, however, that they were washed in between. Peter is an entrepreneur. He's a businessman. He's an expert in personal development. He's a singer, a songwriter. He's an expert marksman. He's what else is he? He's a jolly good egg. He's a fantastic guy. He's a speaker, a public speaker. He's a motivator. He's someone that really inspires. He was the youngest trainer to be made up by the Tony Robbins organization a few years ago. And he is just the epitome, for me, certainly of the people that I know, of someone who really is passionate about life. Peter, welcome, and thank you very much for coming today. Did I leave anything out?
Well, I was quite humbled by hearing such an introduction, and if there's anything I can respond to that, it's that a person is judged by the company he keeps. And I'm obviously blessed to have many great friends in my life, and you're very much at the top of the tree there, Glenn. As you said, we've been friends since 2003 now, so it's actually 9 years. And I've on my journey, I've been very blessed and, as I said, humbled to have met some incredible, amazing people. And if there's anything that I could benchmark myself by, it's the people whose company that I'm grateful enough to be able to keep. And the fact that we're here in London, the fact that I happen to be transiting through, and the fact we have some time together, which is a little too rare these days, my friend. It was an honour for me to be able to say, please come here and let's have a chat.
Fantastic. We're actually here today at Soho House in London. We're very fortunate to have this space. It's the Queen's Jubilee Day, the 5th of June, so you may hear at some point during the interview low-flying aircraft and people cheering, and you probably won't see them waving any flags unless they climb up the window behind us. But that's all part of the scene, of course, and all part of the passion that Peter's going to share with us today. Peter, I've obviously, if I can put it this way, I've given you, if you like, a lot of labels. Mm-hmm. Things like your speaking, your songwriting, your coaching, and things like this. But who are you? Who are you in essence? What's the essence of Peter? I'd really love to know.
That's a great question, and I think a great point to start with, because so many people get caught up with labels. In fact, my experience is that most of us go through our entire life trying to earn labels in order to validate our sense of identity, rather than switch it the other way around and validate our identity irrespective of labels. And you see it traditionally conditioned in the education system. I am an academic, I am a physicist, I am a fill in the blank, a PE teacher, I am whatever it is, I am an MBA. And people need validation externally through a label in order to underpin a sense of self that is actually missing or invalidated when we're in our formative years growing up. And I think one of the best questions we can ask ourselves is actually, who are you without your name?
Absolutely. And what would be your answer to that for you personally, if I'm putting it as a personal question, which
Well,
in a sense is a bit of a contradiction, but I know you like contradictions.
Well,
Paradox.
the ultimate label that we have is our name.
Yeah.
And it's simply a verbal representation of something that from an early day, our earliest days, we associated with who we are.
Yeah.
We're not our name. We are beyond that. We are far more than that kind of label. But it's very rare we stop to ask ourselves, well, hang on, who am I without the label Peter? And it's in that moment you start to actually get an understanding of the essence of what it really means to be human, what it means to be alive, what it means to be beyond the physical, constant labeling of life, the constant, sort of noise, as we call it, of everyday reality that we've been brought up to accept as true. And we all know that there is a physical reality and there is a metaphysical reality. And just because we can touch one physically but not touch the other, we tend to invalidate the metaphysical. And one of the first, I guess, understandings of getting close to that or closer to that metaphysical reality is taking our name away and sitting there and saying, well, who am I really? What is this collection of cells merged with physical laws, merged with consciousness, merged with a level of emotion, understanding, and what does that mean? What am I here to do? And I don't think anybody has a definitive answer to that. I think the answer is always emerging and evolving, just as we're emerging and evolving. Now, I'm a different person today than I was 5 years ago, and I'm sure I'll be a different person in 5 years from now than I was, or am today. So, who am I without all the labels? I think the one I resonated most with was a good egg. And that's something that I aspire to be, because all we can be without the labels, from my experience, is our word. If we can be our word, then if we can live in accordance with our values and what that means to us, irrespective of whether we feel that somebody else validates those as right or wrong, that's a different conversation. If you are living in accordance with your values, then you don't need a label. You don't need validation. You can't be pushed, you can't be pulled, you can't be cajoled, you can't be influenced outside of that, depending on the level of core strength that you have that ties you to that level of living. And of course our values change, but our level of strength, conviction and integrity around those values is what should or defines ourselves through remaining constant with that, if that makes sense. So in answer to your question, who am I without the labels that you gave, I try to be a good egg, but I don't use that as a reference or a label. I use it as a pointer to say, listen, what are my values? Am I living in accordance with them? And as long as that I'm okay with that, and I don't think that I'm violating people from a level of physical harm or people are less than because they cross my path, that's as long as I'm not going down that route, then I don't need somebody else's label on what I'm doing in order to feel that level of aliveness, that sense of self-expression that allows us to be who we are.
Yeah. I love this because we're already jumping in at the deep end, which I know is something you love to do. Whenever we jump in the deep end, we swim. Tell me something, how easy has it been for you to connect, if connect is the right word, with what I call the metaphysical world?
Great question, and one that has many different layers hidden within it. I think all of us, if we take the time out to disengage from the noise of physical reality, and we all have a life, we're put here not as spiritual beings, we are physical beings as well, but primarily our experience is physical. We have mortgages to pay, we have cars to drive, we have phone calls to make. Living in a 21st century reality, that is unavoidable unless you want to become a monk on top of a mountaintop, which is not an option for most people. So, a lot of us tends to invalidate the metaphysical side or invalidate the connection with it, not because it's not there or we don't believe it's real, but because we're so caught up in the day-to-day grind of engaging with reality at a physical level that we just don't have time to take a step back and say, well, hang on a minute. How do I really feel right now? What's really going on? Most people, if you ask that question, say, I'm fine. You say, no, well, how do you really feel?
Yes.
And by the time you actually get through It's like, well, actually, no, I've got a bit of a headache back here. I've got a bit of an ache in my knee. I mean, most people are walking around unconscious, not even aware of how they feel because they're so distorted and distracted into the physical reality. But if you disengage from that at some point, and obviously there's many practices to be able to do that, meditation being probably one of the most common. Turning off your BlackBerry would be a good start as well. But if you disengage, you start to ask yourself questions that can lead you down different avenues of awareness. How do I know how you feel when you feel sad, Glenn? Right? Because I know how I feel when I feel sad. Now, how do I know how somebody feels when they feel joy? Because I know how I feel when I feel joy. Can I touch that? Is that part of a physical reaction? I mean, the essence of who we are is invisible. Who are we? Am I my height? No, that's a label. Am I the fact that I'm male? No, that's a label. Who I am, that differentiates our uniqueness in the universe, is our character, our sense of humour, our model of the world, our energy, our enthusiasm or lack of it, our values, as I said earlier. That's what makes us us, individual, not the fact we have different hairstyle. So if you can actually come back to that level and say, well, the essence of who we are is metaphysical. The essence of who we are is invisible. What makes you you, Glenn, and why I love you so much is not the fact that you're just a dashing gentleman, the fact that who you are beneath all that.
Yes.
Who you are, because our bodies are going to change.
Yes.
We don't get to vote on that. I have a very different body now to when I was 10 years old. I'm 40 years old next week, and I'm going to have a different body 10 years from now than where I am today. So am I my body? Did Christ know himself as his body? Did Krishna know himself as his body? Did Muhammad know himself as his body? No. They knew themselves as the invisible part. That was the unmoving, unchangeable, resolute, eternal part of who we are. So, how in touch are we with the metaphysical? It depends how much we want to disengage from the noise of the physical reality and start looking at what reality is staring us in the face by saying, well, the essence of who I am is invisible. Therefore, it is a metaphysical aspect. My wishes, my dreams, my aspirations is who I am. Not the fact that I'm a size 12 shoe. And you can look at it from many different angles, but ultimately when you get through translating, what's really going on is that who we are is not this. I mean, the scientists, and this has always been again, probably another part of the conversation, but if I just allude to this for a second. Science and theology and religion seem to have always been on separate paths. And most of them are trying to support their own theories, not by celebrating the reality of the theory, but by discounting opposing theories. And we see this all the time, whether it's political parties, whether it's governments, etc. Right? And so if you try and underpin a scientific level for those viewers here that want a little bit more to the metaphysical side than the traditional label of some woo-woo, get out there, start chanting, and want a little bit more of an underpinning. Let's come to quantum physics for a second.
Yeah.
If I had the eyes of a quantum physicist and I was looking at what I would call a physical reality, if I was looking through the eyes of a physicist, I wouldn't see solid. I mean, this chair, this hand, this watch, most people would call solid in a physical reality. But if you look through the eyes of a scientist or a physicist, what you would notice is something vastly different. And the best way I could explain is if you take my finger and almost think of a string and a pebble, and I was to spin that, and I was to spin it so fast that my other finger couldn't get through, the illusion would be that I'm hitting solid. What I'm really hitting is kind of suspended light waves slowed down into fixed patterns. But again, when we're distorted and distracted because our email just chimed, we don't tend to think in those terms. We tend to think that, metaphysical is something out there for people that want to meditate and chant and go to strange clubs. And what we're actually doing is invalidating the original essence of where we come from.
Yeah.
No scientist has ever been able to explain life or consciousness. We can only come up with theories that may or may not fit at some level. Now, Einstein dedicated the last part of his life to a grand unification theory. I don't think there is one, and if there is, I'm not that interested in finding out. I'm happy to just explore this phenomenal game that we get to live as human beings. knowing that beneath that there is an underlying essence that is eternal.
Yeah.
I mean, can you just think for a second, what would happen when you're not here? Can you ever imagine a time when you are not you? Come back in the room. There's a part of us that goes beyond this.
Totally.
And the more we get in touch with that, the more we tend to find that our external world will revolve around that, rather than our internal world revolving around what we feel to be circumstances beyond our control. And
beautiful, beautiful. I love what you said about consciousness. It's very interesting. I was reading something, I was actually listening to his audio book the other day, Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now. It's something that keeps coming back. And he has this wonderful metaphor. He said, well, you know, the rhetorical question was, you know, why humans don't understand consciousness. And he said, well, think of a fish. If a fish had a human mind and you said to him, what is water? Tell me what is water. The fish with that human mind, or the equivalent thereof, would not have any idea about what you were talking about. You know, and this, I think that I think is a fantastic analogy of what we're talking about. But you see, I think the slightly deeper element there is how much, this is something I wanted to ask you sort of slightly later, but I'll ask it now because it's appropriate. How much of this do you think is because the royal we, live in a sort of mind-driven, you know, a mind-generated world, you know, where most of our actions, our thoughts, our desires, even our desires, you know, are mind and or ego-based or driven. And relatively little, it seems to me, comes from the heart. Certainly that's my experience. I mean, do you see, has there been such a parallel in your own life, and what's been your own experience with that?
And you're full of great questions today, Glenn. Yes, absolutely, and this is a journey, and it is a journey. I don't think anybody is born enlightened. You could probably name 7 figures in history that, you know, have potentially, you know, been awarded that accolade of being born enlightened, but, you know, certainly, you know, Buddha wasn't born enlightened. It was a journey for him, and part of everything is the journey, and it was certainly that for me as well. When I was a younger man, I was dealing with a lot of the insecurities that I find most people end up facing. And the primary driver or underpinning of that was what I tend to refer to as the 2 primary human fears, which are the fear that we're not enough, and ultimately, therefore, we won't be loved, depending on how many layers you want to peel back of the onion. But go after that awareness, I encourage you, because it is there.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I say the fear that we're not enough, you know, usually not good enough. Not good enough, not, you know, certain enough, not rich enough, not popular enough, not young enough, old enough, whatever it is, fill in the blank. And, you know, I tend to say that if we don't think that we have a blank to fill in, it's usually because our egos are playing hide and seek with reality. And for me, the journey...
I like that.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah.
But the original
And
journey
true.
for me, totally, was I was trying to prove myself, and business happened to be my forte. I was never academic. You know, I couldn't get school. I couldn't spell school. You know, I dropped out of school at 16 at the first chance I got, like a rat up a drain pipe, just to get out into the real world and start working with, you know, anything that wasn't a classroom.
Yeah.
And I kind of fell into business. It was always my, you know, ambition to want to be an entrepreneur. And driven by the insecurities, or trying to avoid the insecurities and prove to myself, my parents, my friends, my peers, that I was good enough, was really the desire and motivation, primary motivation, behind me going out and eventually becoming, by what most other people would label, successful. Now, inside, I was a mess. In fact, it was a two-edged sword, because I became, you know, very successful financially at a young age, say 21, 22. And everybody then saw me as this kind of wonder boy. Now, underneath that label, I'm just me. I mean, I just did things that anybody could do. I'm not clever. I just, you know, happened to, you know, either get lucky or do what I did.
Yeah.
So now, the game becomes, how do I support that image? Because if anybody was to finally peel back the, you know, the curtains and find out that it was just a little guy and not a wizard, and I didn't have an S on my chest, oh my goodness, then my whole world would come crashing down. And, you know, again, the primary fear would be triggered that I'm not enough, and therefore, you know, I would lose respect and ultimately love. So for me, a lot of the initial motivation was about avoiding the fear of not being enough. When I finally grew out of that, and I was very lucky, I was 25 when I had a significant emotional experience. I was driving home from the office one day, 2 o'clock in the morning, tired, working 130 hours a week, just to prove to the world that I could maintain this facade. And I was never enough. It never will be enough on that kind of journey. It's a hamster wheel to nowhere that most people, unfortunately, either burn themselves out or run to their grave on. And I came to a point where I fell asleep driving home. I hit an intersection at 60 miles an hour, and I sat at the side of the road with a pretty sorry car. Luckily I wasn't hurt and nobody else involved. But I asked myself honest questions. It's like, why am I doing this? Why? What is it for, really? I mean, ultimately I was building a monster that was trapping me, and that wasn't the life I signed up for. That wasn't the glamour that everybody expected to see when you become financially successful, or have the accolades or the car or the the security that people associate with wanting to be happy or fulfilled. Well, what was that about? And it was really a case of, whoa, hang on a minute. What I'm really doing here is trying to prove to everybody that I'm good enough. And it was an awareness that I'm very grateful to. Like yourself, Glenn, I've had many great mentors, but it was an awareness that I got exposed to a while after that by a phenomenal guy called Jerry McKinney. And Jerry, who is just one of the most amazing, enlightened, beautiful, gentle, and incredible giving souls I've ever met. In fact, I used to say, when I grow up, I want to be a Jerry McKinney. And Jerry turned around to me one day and he says, Peter, you know something? You're full on in everything you do. You're 110%. You go this. If we need something impossible to happen, we call you. We have no doubt. In fact, if we hear over the radio at an event where we're working with some challenges that Peter's been sent, we just relax, go and have a cup of tea. It'll get taken care of. He says, but you need to understand something. And I looked at him. My ego had just been stroked a little bit, and I'm wearing the label of sort of the S. And he says, you know something? No matter how many times you screw up, no matter how many times you get it wrong, no matter what happens on the outcome, we'll still love you.
Wonderful. How wonderful.
Honestly, I walked away from him almost like in a daze. I'm like, you mean I don't have to earn love in order to validate myself? Well,
now let me stop you there. There's a huge message there, isn't there? Think of parents bringing up their kids, right? To say that sort of thing. Think of our education system, which you mentioned earlier. Think of teachers. Think of all the so-called adults, the people that should know better, bringing their children into the world on that sort of philosophy. I'm pushing this slightly, but I can see your passion in it for too. Why doesn't this happen, Peter? Why do we, again, the royal we, why do people like us, and not necessarily us, everyone, have to wait for that one moment, that one Jerry McKinney to come along and say, hang on, we love you anyway?
Because of the same reasons as to why I was running my patterns and most people run their patterns. Because we're all human. And a lot of teachers get their identity validated through the significance of being a teacher. Therefore, there's an authoritarian level of significance that gives them self-worth.
Right.
And you have two different types of teachers. I sit on the board of one of the best business schools in the world, INSEAD in Fontainebleau,
sure,
in Paris. And I'm not an academic. In fact, I think the only non-graduate they've ever invited to sit on the board. And what I noticed through not having those lenses to look through and understanding human behavior, which has, again, been my passion for nearly 20 years now, I noticed there's two types of teachers. You have the most common teacher, who are there to validate their identity as a teacher through being more superior, more significant, more authoritarian. And they generally want to help because teachers can't get involved in that profession unless they have a sense of wanting to contribute. But part of that contribution is underpinning a need for significance as a teacher. It's not a good or a bad thing. It's just what it is. But then you have a markedly different contrast to that, where you have other teachers whose entire mission or purpose is for their students to excel them. And you look at it from that perspective and there's no ego involved. It's like, how do I get these guys and lift them up and watch them fly, versus how do I wear the label of teacher and I'm at the front of the room and I'll tell you what to do and I'm the one that's responsible for grading you and marking you. And again, that I'm not taking anything away from teachers. I'm making a distinction between different levels of emotional maturity, because a lot of us are running our own patterns at a level where we're trying to avoid the primary fear that we're not enough. And if I hadn't had that car accident and actually sat at the side of the road shaking and got to a place where I was willing to ask myself honest questions and not be afraid of the answers, I might still be doing the same thing. Yeah, and I see it a lot in business, where you have CEOs of major companies who have been in the role for 30 years, and it's primarily because they want to be the teacher. They are the CEO. It's about being the big man on campus to validate a sense of significance, so it overlays the fear that we're not enough and the insecurities behind that. And so, Jerry, I think if you talk to him, he'll tell you he went on his own journey. Yeah, he was a place where he wasn't a great person to be around in his early days until he was exposed to some of the insights that we're lucky enough to be able to discuss now.
Yeah.
And he was able to touch me in a way that went me, hang on a minute, what? You mean I could actually just be myself? And I got to the understanding, and John DeMartini gives it as a beautiful quote. He says, and I encourage people to use it as an incantation because it's so powerful when you finally get the message. He says, no matter what I've done or not done, I'm worthy of love. And for most people, unfortunately, they go to their grave, as I said, never actually feeling that awareness at an emotional, spiritual, cellular level. It could be an intellectual understanding. Most people know what I just said if they speak English.
Yes.
But living that from a place of true liberation is something that's very, very different. And we're all on our own journey. It's it's not saying taking anything away from somebody if they're not there. It's it's saying, listen, here's an invitation to look at something that says, you don't need to earn love. You're worthy of it, irrespective of how many times you screw up, how many times you do something that you're not proud of. You'll always be worthy of love, because there's a very different distinction between somebody and their behavior. I remember listening to somebody, a very enlightened guy, turn around, who was on about relationships, and someone says, well, what if you caught your wife having an affair? He says, well, I'd still love her. He says, I would be distraught at her behavior. I'd probably kill him. But I'd still love her as the essence of who she is. How could I not? How could I never do that? And I thought, wow, what an enlightening way to look at something. Because it finally understands that there's a difference between who we are and the behavior we're engaging in, which is usually driven by the fear of not being enough, the fear of not being loved, the desperation for approval, significance, connection, validation, all of the things that we're told we need in a world to go and earn, or conditioned by parenthood in its traditional sense to want to basically be tick the boxes to get approval for, rather than recognize we were born with it to begin with.
Tell me, Peter, about your early conditioning, quote unquote, if that's the right word, your school days, your early education. You're still not 40. It's amazing. I feel I've known you for ages. And you're such an incredible, mature guy in that sense, and I mean that, as you know, in a way, in a very complimentary sense. But what were the sort of what were the guideposts? What were the signposts along the way, would you say, during your childhood?
Well,
pointing you maybe to where you are now, or where you've been on your journey.
It's funny. My father was a bit of a gang leader. Bit of a Leicester Mafia teddy boy, and my mother was a trainee nun.
Well, I didn't know that.
it was quite a dichotomy, and they got together, as you can't help who you fall in love with, and 10 years later I appeared, and what I learnt from my parents was that my mother, who had a huge role her entire life in the Catholic Church, She was a special minister. I mean, she received letters and gifts from the Pope. I mean, she was just the most giving, unconditionally loving, contributing soul I've ever met.
Wow, that is.
And a great model. My father was a hard man, yeah, in a physical respect. Very proud, very strong.
Hard in the sense of the sort of archetypal male.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And my mother never. He was also an atheist. Yeah.
Okay.
And my mother never forced or pushed her views on him, and he never disrespected my mother's views. And the underpinning of all of that was tolerance. And I think that gave me a real start in understanding and appreciating different people's point of view. Because so many people need to be validated in terms of them being right, not by their inner sense of internal reference and conviction, but by an external validation through alignment from how many other people they can get to agree to them. And again, that's a tunnel with no cheese. It's hard work, and you see people who are free of that, and there's such a weight off their shoulders. I don't need you to validate whether my football team is the best football team or not.
Yes.
Otherwise, I'm going to get into a 3-hour argument over somebody who is just mirroring his own beliefs.
Yes.
Right now, I'm not a huge football fan, so probably not the best example. But you understand my point.
But it doesn't need to be a football team, does it? This is what you're saying. I mean, this is something we do. Anything that we feel an attachment to. You could say.
I think that style of music is great. Somebody else says I think it sucks. I like house. No, house sucks. I prefer hip hop. Yeah, and you hear these people arguing. I mean. It's and what
as
they're
if their
saying,
life depended on it almost.
Yeah, and what they're saying is, listen, I'm so insecure about my, approval of my genre of music that I need to convince you that it's right. I mean, when you look at it through those eyes, it's almost laughable. It's like, listen, you like hip hop, great. Yeah, I like house, great. Right? Yeah, I'm not going to go to a club where you're at, and I'm not going to judge you for not coming to my club. I mean, next. And there's a way of being able to take it to a more base level, and I'll share what I think was quite a powerful example that I think the people watching this will probably understand as well. Ask you a question: how many senses do we have on a physical level?
Well, I suppose the traditional answer is 5. You turn.
Correct. Yeah, that's why I said physical. We won't get into the other sense conversations because that'll take us down a whole different avenue, but. On a traditional physical sense, most people recognize we have 5 senses. Taste, touch, sight, sound, smell, and each one of these is responsible for processing external material reality through one of those filters into our experience.
Right.
So there's nothing that I can't experience in the external world sitting here that isn't first filtered through one of those 5 senses.
Right.
And I can feel the chair underneath me. I can sense the temperature of the room. I can hear
in
your
the physical
voice.
sense.
In the physical sense.
Yeah,
I can see the room around me. I can hear the noise out there. I can smell your aftershave. Whatever it is.
Yeah.
So here's a question. We're in agreement with that. There's nothing too controversial about what I just said, right? So we all have the 5 senses. But how many of us all like the same food? Well, not many, right? There's room to have a variable there, yes or no? Yeah, I like Indian, I like Chinese, I like Italian, whatever it is. Yeah? Yes. And again, you hear people argue over that. Yeah, as we've just demonstrated, how many people like the same kind of music?
Yeah.
How about the same smells? That's why we have so many different aftershaves, colognes, perfumes, right? We have a different sense of what we like to smell. Right? We have different sense about what we like to touch and feel. We have, how many people have the same favorite color? So what we're really saying is that, we all have the same equipment called the 5 senses, and each one can give a different experience for each person than everybody else. So, what if 2 people see the exact same event, witness the exact same event, use the exact same equipment called the 5 senses to process that? Is it possible they can come up with an entirely different conclusion, yes or no?
Totally.
Of course. Who's right?
there is no right or wrong. I mean, they're both experiencing it, what they're experiencing, right?
That's an understanding that is usually beneath a lot of people that are still using this sense of, well, no, you need to look through my senses and agree with what I am because that's right. Well, it's right for you, it's right for me. But it may not be right for 6.5 billion other people. So understanding tolerance, that, you know something, we all have the same five senses, they can all be different for everybody else, we can all experience the exact same event, come up with the entire different conclusion based upon our individuality, and rather than argue that, celebrate or recognize the uniqueness of that as to what makes us us. From that perspective, you can turn around and say, you know something, I'm okay, you're okay, and as long as you don't invalidate or violate my sense of value, self, etc., then I'm okay for you to be over there and have your conclusion. But you see, you know, the classic example is a married couple, always arguing. Arguing based upon, a lot of the time, the fact that I need you to validate my conclusion that I came up with through my five senses on this particular experience. You know, again, when you get all through done translating, that's ultimately what's going on. Yeah, so if you can rise above that, not through intellect, but through awareness.
Yes.
I'm not a smart guy. I mean, I'm an average IQ, an average guy. But what's been so beneficial in my life, Glenn, has been I've been fortunate enough to have access to some amazing people like yourself, people like the mentors that I've studied under, or had the desire to go and want to be in their presence and listen or learn or read their books.
Yeah.
And some of it I may disagree with, and that's cool, that's what makes things happen. But sometimes you hear one awareness, and it could be just like, you know, understanding that the five senses are different for everybody. Well, hello, of course they are. But what does that mean in day-to-day reality? It means that I can be okay with my conclusion, my football team, my style of music, my favourite food, and not need you to validate that by me trying to tell you that yours is wrong. And that's huge for most people.
Peter, there's a model of the world that I think most people, if not everyone, at some point subscribes to, if I can keep it in a sort of fairly neutral sense.
Sure.
And it's to be very blunt, it's a judgment model. Now, I know that you're very passionate about this as well. It's something that you personally, and I know from my own experience, it's something that I've not found easy to, if you like, move away from. Words are not really going to be able to enable me to convey the real sense of it, but please stop me if you feel you need clarification. But you know, I just have this sense that if we can only get out of this addiction to judging, obviously not just other people, not just pieces of music, not just what food we eat, but ourselves as well, and that's all usually going on in the head, then that is a way, ultimately, not maybe the way, but a way of raising our level of consciousness so that we're actually almost aligning with our greater truth, which I think, personally, I don't think is judgmental. I don't think the essence of who we are comes from a place of judgment, you know. I'd love to hear your view on that and what your experience has been, because I know this is a model that you're also very, very passionate about, and how, you know, especially for people watching this, how we can actually, certainly in your experience, but perhaps more generally, how we can move away from this need to label and judge people and compare and measure and saying I'm better than him, etc., etc.
I think the starting point is to peel back the layers a little and go behind the scenes. Otherwise, we start judging people who judge.
Yes, there is that.
Right? And yeah, I said, I think at the beginning that a lot of people have a sense of values that need to be validated externally. And judgment usually comes from when people are out of alignment with what we see as our model of the world. Usually the stronger the judgment is based upon how far away they are living from our values. And you know, you can understand that.
Sorry, what do you mean by our values in that context?
Your
values, like your and my values, or?
Yeah, if I have my set of values that I live by, you know,
right.
I value family, and I see somebody leave their kid on their own at home, I'm going to judge them for that.
I see, yes.
For example,
I've got you, yeah.
If somebody values independence and thinks that by leaving their kid on their own at home...
So the values become, in effect, the filter by which we...
Yeah, the stronger, what I think is that the further away we see somebody from our values, or how we see somebody invalidate by living their own values which are out of accordance with ours,
Right.
the further away they are, the stronger we judge.
Okay.
Classic example would be somebody who murders somebody. Most people don't see themselves as a murderer, so we judge that very harshly.
Right.
If somebody was a vegetarian, saw somebody eating meat, maybe not as harsh as a judgment, but it's still, there would be a judgment there if they needed to validate their own sense.
Because they're different to me, really, and
Exactly.
I'm not like that. It's
Exactly.
a sort of,
But again, let's peel back the layers here, because one thing that allows people to grow in awareness and hopefully ultimately raise our levels of consciousness to a point where we can start to let go of judgments on a more regular basis, is to understand the psychology behind it, because those awarenesses start to fill in the missing gaps. Like the awareness that we have different models of the world because we have different ways of interpreting the five senses, for example.
Yes.
So if you understand, as I said at the beginning, most people are trying to avoid the fear that they're not enough, and ultimately look for love, or avoid things that will invalidate love.
Yeah.
And if you go through most childhoods, a lot of the defining moments were based upon, or our behaviors were based upon where we got or didn't get love from. It's just oversimplification when you talk to other people that want to write books on it, but
Yes.
ultimately that's what's going on.
Yeah.
Our habits, our conditioning, our belief systems, a lot of them in the formative years of growing up were formed unconsciously through behaviors that either led to or took away love.
Yeah.
And we can all blame our parents, and there's an international epidemic on blaming parents. We forget that they were just us, just a little older,
Yes.
and that kids don't come with an owner's manual.
Yes.
And they were only
And
trying to
parents
cope
don't
with...
have a parent's manual either.
They're just trying to do what we're doing right now and cover up their own deal. And deal with their own insecurities and their own fears and their own model of the world.
Yeah.
So if you can start to understand that the reason people judge, as I said earlier, is usually out of an unconscious need to be right themselves, based on an external reference that if you don't align with me, then you are wrong. Not that, listen, whatever your deal is your deal. If it's totally out of alignment with where I'm at, then I'm going to judge it more strongly. And 9 times out of 10, we don't know the backstory. We don't know the underlying reasons, and we judge before we even question that. And the one thing I found is that people do things for reasons, Len. Now, they may not be your reasons, they may not be my reasons, but people always do things for reasons. And if I had their background, their belief, their story, their model of the world, chances are I would do that behavior as well. Now, when you can understand it from that perspective, you start to open up. And if you want the fast track to trying to let go of judgment, replace it with compassion. When you start to see somebody on a street begging for money, you can walk by and say, for God's sake, go get a job. Right? I got a job, I'm responsible, I went to school, right? Stop begging for my hard-earned money, and you have a judgment frame that goes straight over that.
Right.
You don't know their story, and to a large extent, their story isn't that relevant. But if you can understand, I say a lot, there for the grace of God go I. Classic phrase, that could so easily be me. And most people let go of the awareness of what we should be grateful for. And I firmly believe that the poor don't need charity, they need inspiration. And inspiration can come from a level of validating themselves that they can be loved too, because they feel judged. Imagine you sitting on a street corner in the rain, in clothes that haven't been washed for a month, hoping that somebody's going to come by, and for every 100 people you may get 20, 30 pence a pound thrown in your hat. And for that, the trade-off is that 99 people are going to look down on you and think that you're beneath their feet. What does that do to somebody's self-esteem? And eventually you become immune to it, but it validates the fact that you're not good enough.
There is, of course, another perspective to this, which I've always found slightly attractive, and that is that, and I often find this myself, if I'm walking past a beggar or someone selling the big issue, invariably now I try to give every time Now that's just my thing, and maybe my reasons are, well, they're just my reasons. It doesn't matter. There's no judgment. But do you have a sense, Peter, that there's we started this interview with a wonderful quote, your quote about learning from life. Everything is like learning. Whatever you do in your lifetime is a learning experience. And is there not an analogy here that that when we, they're almost like beggars are there for us to learn compassion. People are there for us to, to say, right, well, I'm not going to judge this person because he's not the CEO of a big company, or he's not XYZ, going back to what you said earlier, because he hasn't got academic qualifications or whatever it is. All the stuff by which we again, the royal we, tend to sort of judge people and say, look, this is a human being. And maybe he's come on this planet, maybe he's living this lifetime to be exactly as he is now, and to learn his own, lesson, if you like. I don't necessarily buy the whole thing about we're coming here to it's like school. I can see the pros and cons of that. But leaving that aside, I mean, what's your take on that? Is that a perspective that you see as something affecting your own life and has affected your own life? And what's, in other words, what's the bigger picture for you? Is there a bigger picture there?
I spent large part of the last 12 years, every year, volunteering up to about a month of my time on and off around the world, working with homeless, drug addicts, suicide, abuse cases, trauma. And that's been a very enlightening experience. It's also taught me a huge amount about human behavior in many different places where most people don't want to be around.
And humility, I imagine, as well.
Humility, gratitude, and part of my sense of wanting to grow and contribute is that I want to help these people. Part of my understanding reality is the fact that not everybody's going to be helped.
Yes.
And I can only do so much, but underneath that is the real reason I'm trying to help them to make me feel good, or is it really about genuine contribution? And some people are here to learn a lesson, and I firmly believe that. Some people are who they are today because the troughs that they were in was so deep. Some people need to hit rock bottom in order to basically say, something, bang, I've been there, I'm done, enough of this, I'm out of here. And I've seen so many examples of that. And if you start to hold their hand too much halfway down, some people, that's all they need, and they want to get back up, and it's a genuine level of facilitation. Others, they get so much connection and significance and secondary gain by people trying to help them that it entraps the pattern. And I'm here to do so much. My mission isn't to change the world. My mission is to live my truth as best as I can. And if I can help leave a thumbprint on somebody's life in a more positive way, then great. I'll sleep better at night and leave this place in a better world. That's what I think, that everybody aspires to want to do some of that. But I'm not on a quest or a martyrdom to try and help and change the world. All I want to do is walk my path. And if I can be as bright as I can, maybe I can light candles that I walk past through my example of being true to myself, rather than have some sort of sense of mission. I have to run around and light everybody's candle that's gone out.
Yes. Okay.
And I was on that mission at one point. It's exhausting, and you then for every 3 candles you light, 2 go back out. And I used to, when I got into personal development, I remember I was 17, 18 years old, and I'd speak to somebody in a bar, and most people's favourite topic is why their life doesn't work. All about them and all the crap that's going on in their world. And I'm like, wait, that's okay, because I know how to fix that. In fact, and I get into a conversation, and they'd almost be inspired. Yeah. And I'd say, hey, listen, go out and read Think and Grow Rich, for example.
Yes.
And we'd go off on a high, and I'd go home at night thinking, wow, I just helped somebody. And I'd see them 2 weeks later, and all I'd been thinking of is, I wonder what chapter they're on now. Did they get the same ahas and insights and inspiration I got?
Yes.
And I'd see them 2 weeks later and say, hey, John, how's it going? How'd it go? And he'd go, oh yeah, what was that book called again?
Yeah.
And I'd have this deflated level.
Well, that's a classic example, isn't it, if I may say so, of what we were talking about earlier, the attachment to the result. It's vital, isn't it, to really, for me anyway, and I'm sure for you too, to almost like to let go of any result, of any expectation.
There's a difference.
Otherwise, it's like then, of course, the emotional reaction comes in. You know, I'm pissed off because that guy didn't follow my advice or whatever.
Yeah.
I've had that, you know, many times.
Again,
So
peel back the layers. That there's a difference between validating myself by how many candles I can light, and being so bright to my own truth that spontaneously people who you walk by, some of them may just catch a flame and go off on their own journey.
Yeah.
And that's different. That's why, you know, if I give a talk, I mean, I gave a talk a couple of days ago, and I sometimes speak to audiences of several thousand.
Yeah.
And the first thing I do is I say, listen, you may again disagree with what I'm going to say here today. That's fine, but I am not attached to what you go and do with this.
Yes.
Because that's a measure of their learning, not my teaching. That is a measure of where they're at in their life, and if I was to validate myself by what happened there, then I'm going to be always upset, always checking for the scorecards on the feedback forms, always on a hamster wheel of self-validation from an external perspective. Not saying, something, I believe this, and I'm willing to be unpopular in the moment for what I believe is the greater good.